If you thought Apple was done with their hardware announcements this year, you were wrong, because Apple just updated 3 new product lines, specifically with the MacBook Air, the iPad Pro, and the Mac Mini. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to go over the keynote, skip over most of the BS, and condense the hour-and-a-half presentation, hopefully down to much less than that. So let's get started and just cut to the good stuff. We can begin with the new MacBook Air. It's been a while since they had one of these, and the first major update is that it now has a Retina display. The last one did not have that, so it's a major improvement, probably the biggest thing you would notice up front. It is a 13.3-inch display, and that has a resolution of 2560 by 1600. Another thing they added was Touch ID right onto the keyboard. Very nice. So glad it is not Face ID. It kind of gives us hope for the future, maybe for the iPhones. Perhaps they'll bring it back if they can manage to get it under the screen or something like that. The Touch ID uses a new T2 chip, which supports a whole bunch of different features, including hardware encryption of the solid-state hard drives, and everything else from even hardware video encoding of 𝐓𝐸VC, which is H.265 for much faster video playback. It's also getting a 3rd generation updated butterfly style keyboard. I know a lot of people do not like that keyboard, so that might be a plus or minus depending on who you are. And it also has a Force Touch touchpad, not a clicky kind, but it does feel like it'll click, so all solid state. Presumably it'll be less prone to breaking. As for audio, they upgraded the speakers, so apparently it's 25% louder with 2 times the bass. However you manage to measure that, I don't know, but you take it with a grain of salt, I guess. And another interesting thing is it does have 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports, which allows you to output things like video displays or even an eGPU, external GPU. So if you needed some extra horsepower, you could hook up something like an external GPU enclosure and get that in there, even if it's on that tiny little MacBook. As for the specs, they're not too bad. You get an 8th gen Intel i5, middle of the road. You also have up to 16 gigabytes of RAM, although it only comes with 8 gigabytes standard. And there's also up to 1.5 terabytes of SSD storage, although it only comes with 128 gigabytes standard. And to upgrade it all the way, it's really expensive. We can get to that in a bit. As usual, Apple really doesn't talk about battery capacity. They just call it all-day battery life, of course, because that's the most useless measurement on the planet, so obviously Apple has to use it. Though they do tell you it is 15.6 millimeters thick and only 2.75 pounds, which is actually a quarter of a pound less than previous MacBook Air. As for the price, it's not cheap, obviously. It's $1199, although you could upgrade it to a whopping $2,600 if you get the upgraded RAM and storage. So even though it's not cheap, when you put it in context alongside something like what they're charging for the iPhones, honestly, it's not that expensive for what you're getting, although you might be able to get a lot more out of something like a MacBook Pro for a similar price. So this is definitely going to be for people who really need to be portable and prioritize that over anything else. All right, moving on, we could talk about the Mac Mini. Also been a while since this has been updated, so this is pretty exciting, even though I'm probably not gonna get one, but still exciting to just see new tech. For the processor, you can choose between 4 or 6 cores, so it's an i3 to an i7, and of course you're gonna get a much higher price tag for the big one. It also has an upgraded RAM capacity up to 64 gigabytes, but it only comes standard with 8 gigabytes. Very surprising. 8 gigabytes I do not think is good enough on any PC these days, even on a Mini. It also has a very high storage capacity, up to 2 terabytes, but again, they only give you a paltry 128 gigabytes standard. Some other features you get are the T2 chip like we had in the MacBook Air we just talked about, so that does come with things like 𝐓𝐸VC encoding, so maybe if you want to use this for like a home theater PC, might work out. You've also got some really good I/O ports, including 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, 2 USB Type-A ports, which is like the standard one, and even the option for 10 gigabit Ethernet. Very exciting. Not sure how many people have 10 gig wired up in their home, but if you want it for like a server or something like that, it's there. Now for the price, which is kind of interesting because on the base model, base specs, like with the i3, only 8 gigabytes of RAM, 128 gigabytes of storage, it's only $799 only when it comes to Apple, yeah, right. But if you want to trick it out with everything, you can get this thing up to $4,200. Oh my God. I don't know why you would spend that much on a Mac Mini when you could spend that much and get an insanely powerful PC, but I guess some people just, they don't care. They gotta have Apple no matter what. That's up to you. So moving on to the third major announcements, they had the two different size models of the new iPad Pro. So there's a new one, 11-inch and 12.9-inch. The 11-inch model actually has the same footprint total, but they expanded the screen, so it's actually bigger within that footprint, and it has a resolution of 2388 by 1668. For the 12.9-inch, it's a bigger screen, but actually has a smaller footprint, interestingly, and that has a resolution of 2732 by 2048. And both of these have the new liquid crystal type display that they kind of talked about with the iPhone XR. So that's not OLED, it presumably is a type of IPS. But honestly, when it comes to OLED, apparently, it's a bit difficult to get things like higher refresh rates on there, and so this has a 120 hertz. Apparently, OLED is not always super color accurate, or at least as color accurate as IPS. So if they're really gonna make this a pro device for people who are doing graphic design and stuff, even though OLED overall may look better, accuracy is probably going to be a priority here. Thickness, these are extremely thin, 5.9 millimeters, although you do have that camera bump, which is kind of stupid looking in my opinion, but whatever. And it also apparently has 25% volume than the previous models. Another major thing you'll notice here is that there is no home button. So that does mean they added Face ID. However, there is no notch. Thank God. I mean, if they added a notch, it would just be absurd. Now, when it comes to Face ID, I strongly prefer Touch ID, at least on my phone. And another reason I don't like it is obviously because of the notch. But I think when it comes to an iPad, I probably wouldn't mind as much because you're not taking your iPad out of your pocket, hundreds of times a day, potentially. I don't know, that's a bit exaggerated, but you get my point. Yeah, if you're gonna be using an iPad, you're presumably gonna be kind of sitting down, and it doesn't matter if it takes an extra half a second to unlock. With no home button, that means you're gonna get the same swipe gestures. I don't really mind the swipe gestures on my phone, so that's not too bad. Now, on to the specs. First, we can start off with the CPU, which actually is a pretty big deal in my opinion, at least the way they presented it. Beyond even the marketing, it seems pretty awesome. So this is the A12X Bionic chip. This is an 8-core CPU, and they say for single core performance, it has 35% better performance on one core, single core processes, and for multi-core, apparently is 90% faster than previous iPad Pros. If that's true, that is absolutely insane. And good on Apple for actually making that much of an increase in performance in one generation, although I guess it isn't exactly 1 year old, but still, you get the point. And for graphics, they're saying it is 1,000 times faster graphics performance, I'm assuming in some situations, compared to the previous generation. And they're saying that this is the same graphics performance you'd get out of an Xbox One S. And I have an Xbox One S. It's pretty darn good, especially when you consider that with the iPad Pro, you're getting it in a insanely thin form factor. That's very impressive, actually. So actually, props to Apple for figuring that out. Now, on to storage though, they do allow up to 1 terabyte of storage, but the base model is only 64 gigabytes. I think that's really stupid on something that's as large as an iPad Pro, where you're not really hurting for space. And also, it's a Pro device. You'd think they would just add a little bit more storage, give you at least 128. I think it's kind of stupid. So they are giving you 4 different options. It goes 64 gigabytes, it jumps to 256, then 512, and then 1 terabyte. Another major thing they added is USB Type-C. They replaced the Lightning connector. Very interesting. Kind of makes you think, are they gonna do this for the new iPhones next year, or are they just gonna keep this in line with the Pro thing, because a lot of Pro users might have Thunderbolt 3 connections on things like external storage, external GPUs, that sort of thing, and they can now use it with the iPad. I don't know. But one cool thing you can actually do with the iPad Pros now is you can actually charge out. So if you have a lot of battery life on your iPad, you don't have a lot on your phone, you can actually use the iPad now to charge the iPhone, which is kind of cool. They've also updated to a 2nd generation pencil, and thank God they improved this so much. So before, they had that stupid system where you stuck the pencil into the charging port and it would just stick out. It was honestly one of the dumbest designs I've ever seen in my entire life, but they fixed it big time with this. It's now magnetic. It sticks to the top of the iPad. Not only that, but it even charges there wirelessly. That's actually pretty awesome in my opinion. They've also added a tapping functionality, so you can actually like tap between different brush types. I think this probably would make the most sense for using it with like an eraser. So you draw, you want to erase something, you double tap on it, and then you can do it like that. Now for price, as you predict, not cheap at all. The 11-inch is $799. That's the base model. That's only going to get you Wi-Fi, no LTE. You're also not going to get anything more than 64 gigabytes of storage. For the 12.9-inch, it starts at $999. Same deal. That's for Wi-Fi, 64 gigabytes. So not cheap at all, but again, when you kind of consider this compared to something like an iPhone, I would rather spend that kind of money on an iPad Pro personally than I would on an iPhone, and I did buy the iPhone, so it might be worth it, especially if you're going to use it for pro situations. So as for what I think about these new announcements, I actually thought this in general was more exciting than the previous one where they announced the iPhones, because I think they actually upgraded the hardware a lot more on these devices than they did between the old iPhone and the new ones. So even though I'm not going to be buying most of these things, might get the iPad because I haven't had an iPad in a long time, might get that one. Even though I'm not going to get a MacBook Air or a Mac Mini, still exciting to see the new tech. So as usual, hope you guys go and enjoy some of my other videos I've made, and until then, be seeing you.